So another important element of the plan are all the different platforms that you use to communicate, both internally and externally. The organization's websites and or social media sites are often the first places that people go when something happens. So you need to know ahead of time when something happens, what are we going to do with those outlets or those platforms? And the individuals who manage those platforms will need to know what they need to do. The news media will sometimes check your Twitter and Facebook for a statement before they call. Sometimes they won't. If it's been 30 minutes or more since the significant event occurred and you have not acknowledged it anywhere, people will assume, like I said, you're not aware, you don't care. You don't want that. They will start to flood your inboxes, voicemails, and social media feeds with their feelings about your organization and the lack of communication. So we're trying to avoid that. And going and putting each of the platforms that you could issue information on internally and externally, put each of those in your plan and describe what you are going to do and who is going to do those things. Your webmaster should have the ability to quickly place an alert banner on your homepage, directing people to a web page or social media site that will provide updates on the situation. And I'm not talking about redoing your homepage. I'm just talking about a simple banner, maybe in red or a color that, or a way that people can see. Maybe it scrolls, maybe it doesn't, but just a little banner somewhere near the top and that says, hey, we acknowledge the situation. For more information, go here. And then either take it to a separate page where all the information is there, maybe take to a news release if you issued a news release. If there is a partner organization like maybe the fire department or police department who is issuing a lot of the information about that, then maybe link to that. Oftentimes, though, it's not a good idea to take people off of your website. It's good to keep them on your website, especially if your organization is the one that is primary in the crisis. If you're secondary, then I can see maybe sending them somewhere else, fire department, police department, state police, whoever it might be. Some organizations like to use Twitter for instant communication because it's restricted to 280 characters and can include a photo or video and links. You need to decide, though, do you really want to be communicating during a crisis? Do you really want to be communicating on every single platform that you have in a crisis? Because if you only have like one or two social media platforms that you manage, then maybe so. But like us, we have multiple, and we have multiple brands. We have our Spirit of Virginia brand, which is more about cocktail recipes and products in our stores. Do we really want to be communicating about a crisis on those platforms? So we have to really take a step back and look at it like, okay, where are we going to funnel people to in a crisis? The website is often one of the best places, but how are you going to communicate to people to go to your website? Sometimes people like to use Twitter because it's so short and you can get something out there quickly. And maybe what you do is you tell people, hey, updates about this crisis will be communicated on our Twitter, platform, and also supported on our website. And maybe your Facebook goes dark for a little while and you don't post anything. Nothing about specials, about marketing campaigns, nothing like that. Nothing about what's going on in enforcement if it's not related to the crisis. So intranet is another one, and we'll talk a little bit later about employees and communicating with the employees as well, because you cannot forget about internal. Is there an email list maybe that you need to put together to communicate to certain stakeholders in a crisis? I have a media alerts that I send out, and I have a list that's already put together to go to the governor's office, Secretary of Public Safety, and people in that office, the board members, and I just blast the information to them and say, hey, here's what's going on. Here is what we have told the media or the public, and here's who you need to contact if you need more information. Or here's where you send people. If the reporters call you, send them to us at this email address or at this phone number. So that's been helpful. I don't have to sit and go, okay, did I remember to put such and such at the governor's office on this list? It's already in there. Have a plan to temporarily suspend messaging not related to the crisis across all platforms, to include advertising. We did this, and I'm sure some of you all probably did the same thing when COVID hit. You know, do we really want to be talking about cocktail recipes? Well, maybe so, I don't know. But we decided not to put the fun type of messaging out there right after COVID hit, because frankly, everybody was, you know, we were all quarantined at home, and it wasn't fun and it wasn't happy times. And we didn't want to seem tone deaf. So we went and looked at everything that was planned for our social platforms and for advertising, and just said, you know what, let's cut it out. Let's not do it. We'll decide later when we want to bring it back. But for right now, let's not do that. And so put that in your plan, though. Don't think that you're going to figure that, you're going to remember that when the crisis hits, because I guarantee you, you're going to have so much going on that that will be one thing that you might get dinged on if you forget to pull the plug on some of these advertising campaigns. People will say, hey, you know, do you not see what's going on out here? Can you please stop? This just doesn't sound right. And you don't want to have that kind of criticism. I talked about email alerts. If you have a customer or partner email group or subscribers to a newsletter, that could be another way to let your stakeholders know where to go for information about the situation. And then employees, we'll talk about that. And that is the next slide, actually. So employees, they're the best ambassadors for your organization before, during, and after the crisis. The more informed the employees are about what's happening and what the organization is doing, the better they can support the response. Also, keeping employees informed builds morale and trust. It's just the right thing to do. I can't tell you how many times I've had employees who I'll see comments from other people within the organization will send me an email and say, hey, you know, we have this employee group over here and they're not really feeling like they know what's going on. Well, you know what? They're right. We aren't informing them like we should. Let's do a better job. Let's get something out. Let's talk about this. Because in a crisis, I guarantee you, if employees don't know what's going on, some will take it to social media. Some will go onto Twitter and voice their concerns and say, or if they feel like you're not telling the public anything, they'll feel like it's their opportunity to tell the public what's really going on, or at least from their perspective, what's really going on. And that's not good either. It's, you know, it's good to have employees involved in the conversation. And sometimes we have employees who will actually comment on our social posts and they'll say, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I definitely know why they made that decision. And as a store employee, I support it. That's great. That's fine. We want employees to see what we're saying to the public and to participate if they feel the need to. But we also need to make sure the employees are well informed. And if we're not informing them, then there's a potential that they could go and say something that is counter to everything you've just been talking about.
Yep. Hey, Dawn, if I could just make a quick remark, it kind of goes back to one of the first slides that I touched on at the beginning about having your media process in place, your social media process in place, all those things. Our social media policy, if you will, addresses some of those things and puts in writing, hey, look, these are the types of things that you just simply cannot do if you're going to work here. And so I mentioned tribal knowledge. You know, it's one thing to have these things between your own ears and you know, the last time we updated that plan, we said not to do this. Social media changes very, very, very quickly. And if you've got new employees, they may not know what the standards are. So it may seem like a relatively, low on the totem pole type of issue, but having that social media plan up to date, in place, socialized, a part of orientation and onboarding, things like that, winds up being important in what Dawn was just mentioning, that if you just think in a kind of pedestrian way that you can just go onto social media and start making comments, you could be undercutting the efforts that your crisis communications team are putting out there. So I can't emphasize that enough.
So Nick,
Yeah.
sort of building on that a little bit, I'm sorry, Dawn.
No, go ahead.
But back in the day before social media, I recall in the field of communications, there were these maybe requirements or mandates that you could say to employees, you do not talk to a camera, you do not talk to a news reporter. You know, would that still apply? Because I mean, you're talking about it in terms of social media, and it is easier to get on your phone and make a comment. But how would that apply if it isn't social? Let's say it's a reporter. I mean, do those standards still hold up? And can you say don't?
I'm
Yeah.
going to let Dawn answer that because we do have a process in place for that, but
Yeah.
I'll let Dawn respond to that.
Yeah, we have a media policy that actually we didn't have when I came on board, and I did see where some people were going and talking to reporters, or they were doing the exact opposite when they should be, like, they would see a reporter out in the parking lot outside of a store talking to customers, which they can do that. That's outside our area. It's not within our store. And they would run outside and tell the reporter to leave. And I'm like, whoa, we need a policy for this. People need to understand that you can't just shove reporters away because you see them outside the window talking to people. No, you can't do that either. So we put a policy together that explains all of that, not just in stores, but we have law enforcement, and when they're on the scene of a shooting or stabbing or something at a licensee or the restaurant, and there's media everywhere, our law enforcement or our special agents, they know what the policy is. They know what they can and can't say to reporters. And so in a crisis, that doesn't change. Our media policy does not change at all. And actually it is, and you wonder why our crisis communications plan is 80 pages, because these policies, the social media policy, the news media policy, those are actually cut and pasted into our crisis communications plan and referred as a resource in the plan.
And Dawn, you were mentioning the Bureau of Law Enforcement and our law enforcement folks out there working with licensees, but even closer to home, 396 stores, store managers, assistant managers, stockers, I mean, just imagine all the people. All it takes is one reporter, ambitious reporter, going in and just tapping somebody on the shoulder and saying, hey, bud, you got a minute? Can you talk to me? Without a rigid, well-socialized plan, all of a sudden you lose control of message management. And like I said, a lot of this, if not most of this, is based on reputation management. How do you really keep your finger on the consistency of the message and manage your reputation?
Yeah. And somebody just talking to an employee, a reporter talking to an employee in a store, that's not necessarily a crisis. 9 times out of 10, it probably won't be. But I think to Maggie's point, what do you have some sort of policy or procedures in place should a reporter approach an employee? And yeah, we do. And that is the same whether it's in a crisis or not in a crisis. We still have the same process that we follow, or that employees follow when they're approached by the news media. A couple of things on this slide that I'm going to touch on before I move on. Important to inform employees, board members, and other key internal stakeholders before the public. And this is something that we consciously make sure of when we're getting ready to issue any kind of statement or notification. Now, as far as a holding statement, that's not necessarily something we'd send to employees. Well, we might have something that goes to employees, but we're not necessarily the holding statement. We probably give them a little bit more information, but it's important to let them know ahead of time, because what could happen? They see it for the first time on, channel 10 or whatever they're watching, and they're going, hey, I work there and I didn't even know this was going on. And they start to feel pretty bad about the organization. Like, well, shoot, if they really cared, they would have told me about this, because, I work there too, So have a plan on the timing of issuing this information. And like during COVID, there was a lot of things going on internally that we were making process and procedure changes internally to, employees, so that it could be easier for them to take leave should they be, need to quarantine. We were making changes in stores where we were putting up plexiglass. We had some of these stores would close. We had our Bureau of Law Enforcement, a couple of the regional offices would close because of quarantining. So we issued the information to the employees first to say, hey, we're closing these stores, or we're closing this regional office, before we sent the news release out to the media and everyone else, or posted the social media post, because we wanted them to know. And even if it's only 15 minutes before, 20 minutes or whatever, just letting them know that then they understand that you have their best interest in mind, and that you're not trying to throw a curveball and let everyone like the media is more important than the employees. No, that's not what we're doing. That's why we're letting you know ahead of time.
So
one
Dawn,
more thing.
sorry, just along those lines, just to so would employees and employee communications be like the top 3 stakeholders that you would communicate with if they're not necessarily number one, or are they number one? And then it would be, a vendor if it's an issue with a vendor, or others in other stakeholders that you have identified.
Yeah, well, and I would put employee communicating internally at least in the top 1 or 2. Now, there's also situations where you feel like, well, if I tell employees this, are they going to turn around and hit forward on that email and forward it to the news media, or forward it to people that wish to do us harm in any way, reputation wise? And you just know that anything you put to go out to employees could potentially end up external. So don't put anything in your message to employees that you wouldn't want the news media putting up on the screen during the 5 o'clock newscast. And that was one thing. There was always a big reminder to everyone is, do not put, sensitive information in the messaging to employees, or on the intranet page. If you do put a page together for the crisis, don't put sensitive information in there that you do not want potentially screenshotted or sent out externally. I mean, employees should know not to do those sort of things, but as a communications professional, you should prepare and make sure that anything that is being conveyed internally is something that you would be comfortable if it got out externally, that it wouldn't really cause too many problems. So yeah, definitely keep that in mind. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So just a few examples of some ways to communicate it with employees. A message from your CEO or agency head with updates on the situation and actions taken. And this could be an email, it could be a video. I've seen some some companies do some great things with video, where the CEO just makes a statement, plain and simple, just one camera, and talks about what's going on, and sometimes that will actually have more empathy than something that the person writes. And conveying something face to face is much better than conveying it in an email or a memo or something like that. That's just, it's warmer when you do it face to face, like in a video. If you have an intranet page, like I mentioned before, dedicated to the crisis and have frequent updates and links to other resources on that page, even an all hands meeting or virtual town hall with Q&A, those are very important. And I know it's a little bit more of a lift sometimes to put those together, and maybe that's not initially during the crisis. And certainly during COVID, we weren't able to do all hands meetings in person. But even if it's a virtual, we have Microsoft Teams at our organization. You may have something similar, just to do something to say, hey, we're having a meeting at this time. The CEO is going to address this situation, and everybody's welcome to come on. We have question and answer time, and just everyone come on board and watch and listen to what he has to say, and give us your questions. That's another forum that you could do this. So not all crises will involve agencies or organizations. Will involve agencies or organizations outside yours, but it's always a good idea to know these folks ahead of time. When this is what we always said when I was in emergency management, the time to meet your counterpart or contact at a partner agency shouldn't be in the middle of a crisis. I know sometimes you can't avoid that, but really it's a good idea to get to know some of these folks ahead of time, your counterparts, definitely, and attend local or statewide emergency planning meetings and participate in exercises when possible. In Virginia, the state and local public information officers for various agencies meet every quarter, at least pre-COVID. And we talked about upcoming exercises and trainings. If you don't have much experience in crisis communications, I recommend you contact your state or local Department of Emergency Management and ask if they have a public information group that you could join. Also, some states have government communications associations that have meetings and offer trainings related to crisis communications. It's a great way to meet some of these people. If there was a significant event like a tornado, a hurricane, a fire that might affect your organization. For Virginia ABC, and I know we're alcohol, sometimes we're not, we aren't always the first that they ask to participate in exercises because, unless it directly involves us, we normally don't have, we're not fit in the playbook there. We're under the Secretary of Public Safety in Virginia, and even though we have an authority designation that makes us more of a hybrid government entity, we still have a role in the state's emergency operations plan, and members of the communications team here at ABC can be called upon at any time to report to the state's Joint Information Center during a crisis. And I'll talk more later about the Joint Information Center, or JIC, but that is something where, we still, even though we're over here, we're kind of this other entity, hybrid organization, we still are government, and we're still a state entity, and we are brought into crisis situations because we're also under the Secretary of Public Safety. And actually, I think, Nick, didn't Emergency Management or Department of Health, they called on ABC and asked if we had any public information folks that they could bring into to help out with the communications efforts. So we're still part of that group. And that's also good training too, if we could send anybody to help out with that. All right, so here is a screenshot of our crisis communications team's 24-hour operation schedule. And this is just an example. These aren't exact times that, during day-to-day that we're operating. This is only during a crisis. In most cases, at least one person will need to be available outside of office hours to respond to media inquiries during a crisis. Nick and I were typically those folks, at least early on, until we could kind of get into a rhythm and have certain other people on our team that were pulled in to answer media questions after hours and on weekends. If it's an evolving situation with developments happening overnight, like a building collapse or a fire, you may need more than one person on call, or perhaps someone on site with the emergency agency public information officer to provide updates to the media on site. Since I've been with AVC, we haven't really had an on-site situation, but that doesn't mean it's never going to happen. So we still have to plan for that. You never know. I mean, we have, if your organization is anything like ours, you have locations all around the state. Anything could happen at any one of those locations. And would it be a fire or a tornado, building, a problem with the building? You really need to be prepared that you may be in one part of the state, something happens in another part, and you might need to send your resources over there to assist, your communications resources. So, Nick, if something happened in the western part of the state, let's say we had a store that, maybe we had a shooting and somebody was killed. Most likely there's going to be a lot of media, and myself or someone else on our team would have to go out there and would be on site to talk to the media, to work with our law enforcement and our retail folks, to work on messaging and answering questions, because we certainly can't do that from here, even though we have, they do Zoom interviews all the time. It really shows when you physically can show up. It really shows that, number one, that it's important, and that you care, because not to say that doing a Zoom interview from one part of the state for something that's happening in another state doesn't mean you don't care, but especially when lives are at risk or when a life has been lost, you really need to do that personal connection. So plan, especially if you're in a pretty decent sized state, and it may take you a while to get there, plan to have a team possibly that you might need to send. And that's just, don't say it won't happen, because I can't tell you how many times I've said, oh yeah, that won't happen. And then it does, like within months later. And I'm just shaking in my head like, oh boy.